banned as. Good idea or not? So there was a time when banned as Commander was a thing. For those of you who've just recently picked up the format, there were a couple of cards that were banned not in the 99, but as Commander. Raphaelos, Arayo, Soratami Ascendant, and Braid's Cabal Minion. In September 2014, we decided to do away with that category and simply ban the cards. As a side note, that was also the update in which we unbanned Kakusho and Metalworker. So it was a turbulent time, I suppose. Now, Toby, you happened to write the announcement for that cycle. You want to talk a little bit about what got us there?
Sure. So, for context, writing the announcement doesn't necessarily mean anything. We tend to try to rotate announcement writing amongst us. Sure. It's not like I wrote this announcement because I was the person who did the thing.
Right.
That does sometimes change. If one of us was heavily involved, for example, the Death Triggers announcement, I explicitly said I'd like to write this one because it involved a lot of sort of technical description of stuff that I had explicitly been working on. Mm-hmm. But for most announcements, it's whoever happens to be the one whose turn it is at that time.
Mm-hmm. We cycle it around.
Yeah, and so one thing that you didn't mention there, which I think is important to note, is the unbanning of Kakusho was directly tied to the removal of Bandit's Commander. What happened is when we decided to remove Bandit's Commander, and that was we'll get into that decision and why it was a good idea at the time. That forced us to evaluate the status of every single card on that list. And sure. At the time that list consisted of Arayo, Braids, Kakusho, and Raphaelos. Was this before or after the Raphaelos trial unban?
Well after.
Well after, okay. So we took these 4 cards and we said, okay, Raphaelos, we tried that. It was a complete disaster.
Right.
Arayo is just a miserable card. Braids is just a miserable card. And then we had Kakusho, and Kakusho was like, this card's been hugely problematic, but it is large and splashy, and it does just sort of drain 5 a time from each player. Why don't we give it a try to unban? So the unbanning of Kakusho was directly tied to the removal of Bandit's Commander because we had to decide what to do with each card on that list.
And to be fair, the intervening years had been pretty kind to the idea of Kakusho being free in the world, because Graveyard Hate had gotten so much better since 2007 or whatever.
Yeah, so Graveyard Hate was much improved, and in general, it was definitely an unban that scared us. I mean, we were sure. Worried at the time. We're like, this is a really, really powerful card, and I think it's still a powerful card, and seeing it is like, ugh, but it's worked out okay.
Oh, it was actually just in our Thursday
it was.
RC stream, although it wasn't really part of the deciding factor of the game.
No, that was a pretty sweet life cushion for you.
Right, but it wasn't the decision point. It helped me win more. But
yes,
but certainly that game was going to happen that way with or without the Kakusho.
Yeah, a lot of that was that I blew up your world and then removed your graveyard. So
right,
that had that effect.
Right, but a giant living death isn't going to care about. Most of the time, isn't going to care about an individual card.
Yeah, and that's why we decided it was worth giving it a shot to unban, and it's worked out mostly.
Yeah, there's certainly. I remember a lot of the byplay on the forums was, "Oh my God, the apocalypse is here," and that never happened. In fact, it met with sort of the kind of ennui after a few months that we find that a number of cards that we've unbanned have been met with.
Yeah, and the Metalworker unban, I think I don't really remember a lot of the circumstances around that, but I think it was entirely unrelated to this. It was just that at that time we'd also been discussing Metalworker, and it came up, and we decided to unban it. I don't think there was nothing related to, well, we're unbanning Kakusho, so maybe we should look at Metalworker or anything like that. I think it was just unrelated.
Yeah, the two weren't tied together. It was probably that we were in a state of heightened discussion anyway. Yeah. So it was, we've been thinking about this. If we're going to cause ourselves pain, let's do it all at once.
I remember, I don't know if it was I was writing the ban announcement or we were talking about it. I was at Grand Prix Denver at the time. I remember sitting with Scott, like discussing it in person, while I was writing it up. I don't know why I remember that. It just is one of those things that's just stuck in my head.
When you say Scott, you mean fellow RC member Scott Larrabee,
yes,
not Denver former high-level judge Scott Marshall.
Yeah, no, Scott Larrabee. We were both at a GP, somewhere Denver-ish.
Denver-ish. Fort Collins.
Could be.
GP Air Force Academy. So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The whole thing was the fact that there was no reason to have this additional rule for just 3 or 4 or 5 cards.
Yeah, I mean, I've ranted about this on multiple occasions. Magic's an incredibly complicated game.
Right.
And so it's generally, and especially when you're looking at something like Commander, which has an enormous audience. I know a lot of people tend to talk about, well, the audience has grown up and stuff. The audience hasn't grown up. The audience has added. And what is added is added a lot of people who are highly invested players, heavily involved. But it still retains an immense core of less highly invested players. And those players, Magic is already an incredibly complicated game. And part of doing a good job with format addendum is you try to minimize the additional complication. It's not a lot of people who are trying to just attack this are oh, the RC thinks this is too complicated. It's not, as an individual rule, there's nothing complicated about it. It's, fairly easy to explain. The problem is that the more additional rules you pile on, the more the overall complexity of the game just gets higher and higher. And so our goal is to reduce this, no individual rule in Commander is too complicated for people to understand. Right. It's when you get to a point where you're adding rule after rule after rule, and the general corpus of rules becomes more than necessary. The
difference between carrying 1 brick and a bag of bricks.
Exactly. So, yes, this individual brick probably is not a huge problem, but is it an individual brick that is sufficiently important to the format to justify sticking it on the HOD?
Yeah. Oh, look at you with the
what?
The HOD.
That's what you put bricks on.
I'm gonna have to go look. Yeah, I assume that's what it was. It's in my list to go look it up. Now, is it a Germanic language word? Is it?
Yes. Probably with HOD. You think?
Yeah. The difficulty is in messaging to the less enfranchised players. It's not that Magic players are really smart for the most part, right? They can understand complex. The way the stack works is way more complex than the concept of banned as commander. But it's the difficulty in messaging, and somebody will see, then the less enfranchised player sees somebody playing Braids in the 99. Light goes on, they're like, oh man, I bet that card would be great coming out of the command zone. And they go build their Brains deck, come back, and people are like, no, that's banned as commander.